It's very curious that um, Christianity should be determined not from, as one might think, from the Gospels or from Christ himself, but rather from Paul, because Paul would never had in the sense of historical living Christ, any encounter with Christ whatsoever. His encounter with Christ is all in this so-called inner man, which seems to be a notion which is determined out of Christological facticity, as it were, out of the sense that everything that's happening in the surrounding world is about the possibility of parousia, or the return of Christ, or the presence of Christ rushing into everything. The facticity of everything seems to be determined out of that by Paul, and the inner man is the one who, if he doesn't err, is then how does it Kierkegaard say it? Is then fear, in the state of fear and trembling, because it's an expectation, and that constitutes his world. And against siding with Christ is then to side with Caesar or Xerxes, and Putin is then a Xerxes figure. So that was kind of a segue into the current political situation. On the one side, it's obvious that the earthly power has to be something like, I give this example before, I might have given the wrong title, but Kagemush, the beginning, where the Daimon justifies himself by saying there'll be endless blood unless I unite this island and subdue all the other warlords, which is actually occurred. So that's interesting, isn't it? And this is the obvious project of the Atlanticists, of the Primicists, of the NATO bloc, of how does one call that? So Putin uses the phrase collective West. I'm not sure if that's anything other but than a retranslation of the what's often said about NATO. I think this is possibly critical mass coming by right now. It'll probably go on for a long time. I think Western Alliance would be the way Bolton would state it. I don't know if Bolton if this is anything different than Western Alliance is meant by collective West. So obviously, I mean, just as we get World War II versus how do you say the Russian version, the Great Patriotic War, is it called? We also have this sense of we don't have the same sense in America of NATO as being the direct enemy of Russia, because Russia was, NATO being such a large, diverse group of countries, as being the direct enemy of the Soviet Union, which is basically now seen as only as Russia, although to some extent some of the old components of the Soviet Union are gathered together as a justification for their satanic power. I just mentioned because it's sort of interesting as a determination of Satan. Satan is the one who's is a created being like other beings. But unlike God the Father, a created being, a specific being, but one that's very ancient and therefore knows all the tricks. And so is in a certain way analogous to a super scientist or something, to the most accelerated scientist. This seems to be a historical possibility of the understanding of what Satan is like. The earthly power, what the earthly power is like. So that any claim to remain just with the ontic or with the specific things then brings you back into the state of being an unbeliever and being tied up with the satanic project, which accelerationism obviously is by that standard. Except that it claims, I guess, accepting that the so-called singularity is the moment that goes beyond all specific physical regions or regions that have to do with movement or anything, or with extension, or however you want to understand or just with the trees and stars and anything external, as against this inner man. So yeah, you have obviously a satanic figure as the head of Russia. The reason I laugh is because it's so obvious that if you think that if we construct this view that the leader of any great nation must be in a way satanic or otherwise a kind of a dupe. So like in the liberal version, then it's like, oh, there's a figurehead called the president, but he doesn't really do that much. And back behind that, there's the project of world domination. Even in the case of Obama, you could see a great deal of active participation in the project of world domination, right? Starting of the words that I think of the Brown University project on the casualties of war says that it caused like 1 million deaths, something like that. In the horizon of that, it's clear that giving a Nobel Prize to Trump sort of makes sense, because you gave a Nobel Prize to somebody that caused 1 million deaths. You gave a Nobel Prize to Kissinger. Why not Trump? He bombed. Why not Trump forward the act of bombing and killing a bunch of civilians in Iran? Why not give him the Nobel Prize for that? At least the war was. At least the killing only went on for 12 days, right? So that's worth the Nobel Prize. By that standard, it's kind of obvious. It doesn't seem that outlandish. I'm just trying to draw a contrast. We have the Russian Satan then, but then we also have the American Satan, because the ruler, the earthly ruler, is always the Satan as against Christ by this Christian cultural view. Let's think then. So what's the point then of all this U.S. aid stuff? So we have this. So here's what happens to make it look sinister, which I'm informed about. But I'm sure there's much more. But the problem is the bulk of it. The problem is it becomes diminishing returns, especially in the sense that if you try to go into it further, you get deluged by conspiracy theory, whack-a-mole, just rubbish, which then you have to ask yourself, is it worth following just because it's such great power? So the whole Epstein thing, which is probably mostly nonsense in my opinion, because it's like Epstein worked at a Dalton Academy, I think it was called, in New York, and there's a bunch of rich people went there. He was a physicist and a mathematician. I don't think he had a degree in physics, but he taught physics and mathematician at a high school level. And he schmoozed. So that's it. I think that's the whole thing. He was a good schmoozer. And that's kind of obvious because most people in physics and math are not good schmoozers in the way that, the best you get is like some piece of shit like Sean Carroll, who's a fake and it's kind of slimy, and you wouldn't really want to be around a guy like that. But the only one that's really socially competent, I think, was Epstein, in the way that so then of course he gets the right tips, he gets in, and I think insider trading is a specific law, but it's also the way everybody makes money if they're an insider, because it's unavoidable. So that's not hard to understand how he became wealthy. It's obvious. And then I think George Samueli on the gaggle made the right argument when he said, it's like, how can Epstein have a list of people he's blackmailing with? Because people would not have anything. Wealthy people don't have to hang out with him. They've got plenty of places to hang out. Why would they hang out with somebody who's known for blackmailing people? It's ridiculous. There's nothing and there's nothing he can purvey which one couldn't get elsewhere and better. There's nothing that special about what he was purveying. So the whole thing is just there's a whack-a-mole conspiracy theory that gets Alex Jones power, and then when somebody believes it and acts on it and goes into the pizza parlor and does whatever, then they say the answer is, well, he went to the wrong pizza parlor, because obviously Hillary Clinton is abusing children in some other pizza parlor or whatever, So it's endless. It's endless. But so for that reason, I think I'm justified in not being more informed than the level I am. And the level I am is, I think the things that are most crucial and the most serious, so the things that give it a serious sense, and where I could see serious people would act on it, as the how is that called? That short-lived, it's called something like Department of Public Safety, which I think is like for 10 or 12 years existed. And there's is a hive of CIA guys who were mostly somehow connected to ex-World War II, the people with World War II experiences. So that these were people that are used to thinking in a warlike manner, let's say. Just as all the Nazis in the Second War had fought in the World War One, and they didn't have a lot of. They were people who had seen a lot of killing, and so their mentality was very different than most of our mentalities, right? So then, yeah, you got this guy. I think his name is Byron something or another. But anyway, there's a Wikipedia page on it. You just have to know to look for it. But the main once you look at that a little bit, I saw some kind of presentation with the university professor on the whole thing, and basically what he said is through this was established a means of bringing back from the places where we had coups overseas back to the homeland, so that the methods used abroad are brought back. So that's true. I think it's probably totally true. And then the guy, what is that guy's name? Byron something or another. The main guy that's associated with it made the remark something to the extent of policing and counterinsurgency amount to the same thing, and they're inseparable. So that's the principle of it. So in other words, you always have to treat, like think of the Black Panthers or something, you always have to treat what would, if liberalism could follow its own song, as it were, the liberalism ideal would be that you could have something called democratic societies within society, and one would be the Black Panthers. We have Nation of Islam, but I'm sure it's been very, put under OPSI by these powers, and there's other versions, right? But they're mostly shut down. And that makes sense by the principle, because it's a Satanic principle, because that's what the world is. So then there's all this constant bickering about, well, let's dismantle this, and then we'll withdraw from world politics and this and that. And I think Bolton is right as the literal devil's advocate, so far as we take this Christian view to be the case. Everything he says is straightforwardly correct. It's all of the things USAID was doing in one way or another were beneficial to America, even if they cost a lot of money. We're buying things, the goodwill of people, or the ear of somebody, or political influence, or a number of things. And in the same way that CIA Bolton, which mentally ill people are often citing, although they could easily discover that the phrase conspiracy theory became popular among thinking people in America through Karl Popper's book immediately after the war, in the same period, and that the CIA's use of it was nothing special. It was nothing particular. It was peculiar to the CIA, but it only follows. And what they said was straightforward. It wasn't even a secret message. All they said is, it would be better if we convinced people abroad that we weren't carrying out assassinations of our presidents. Um, and so, following that Department of Public Safety principle, as stated by one of its heads. I'm not sure if there was more than one head. I think there was, but Byron Angle, I think his name is Byron Angle. Yeah, then it's obvious you bring it. You would prefer the public not to think that either, because that it's just the same principle as the thing in Kagamusha. It's just the same principle of order. You want order, and order implies that the population is, in a general sense, the natives are not allowed to get too restless. Okay, so I think, yeah, when did we gain in maturity as a nation and in the media in general if we would admit those facts and then make an argument from out of that facticity instead of the um, unnecessary bile that's involved in the current discussion, which simply pretends all kinds of things, pretends that you could both have. Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be very difficult unless it was forcefully established as a new kind of framing of things, because there will always be people that would cling to the sort of fanciful version. Oh no, you could have a country in this day and age that's not constantly engaged in global politicking. That's not constantly in contact with all the other countries in the world. That's not constantly concerned with global world trade, global world communication, media, which everyone on Earth can access through the Starlink. In other words, constant total communication and total appraisal of what's happening everywhere else in some form. That's unavoidable. So, I mean, if we admit the situation, and we admit then also that you have to have some kind. Well, okay, then we could ask how so far is this kind of Christological view of Christ saying that render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. How far do we have to continue rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's if the Pauline version is true, and that means exactly rendering to the Antichrist or to the devil? So you have other versions of something. I was just thinking of something I already mentioned because I wanted to show it's also, yeah, what's true in the Chinese situation is true. What's true in the Maoist situation is true in the American situation. It's just more confusion about it, perhaps because the American situation has so much propaganda power and the Maoist has much less. It's just that when Mao had the good idea of the 100 schools of thought, and then he realized the flowering of the 100 schools of thought, and then he realized, but it's a little bit too much arguing, too much. It's a little too vigorous and too sharp. Let's just have, one school of thought, the Communist Party, and then a little bit of, if the people we can trust them, we can let them have some leeway. So the same thing in the American situation. It's sort of like, yes, it's true. There's one party. It wants to treat the rest of it wants to dominate the media so far as it can through the New York Times and the other state media and dominate the so-called narrative. And yes, that's true, but it's not that you could just stop that and then keep going on as before, but in fact it would lead to some kind of very serious breakdown, and we'll only see a little bit of that. But I think we have to face up to that kind of thing when we're having a discussion about this. We shouldn't just go on as though, you can't sort of have it halfway. Either you have to go all the way to Christ somehow, or you end up there's too much confusion under the heavens, and then the Boltons have to win. And so we're actually seeing that because like, Trump has sort of given way. Um, he can't maintain his position because the logic. That's I guess I'll end it with that. He can't maintain his position because he's not very smart. Two, he doesn't know what's happening around him because he's a businessman. He's not a political guy, and Bolton is a political guy. Putin is a political guy. And he can't maintain his position, but also because of the powerful logic of the position, the logical ideal of this earthly power as against uh, the Christ power. It's very, it's a, I mean, it's the basic logos of the Christian thinking. And so, how could he maintain himself against this? So he's told to render unto Caesar, and he renders unto Caesar. So then we have hanging in the background Bannon, well, also in Musk. Uh, Musk, I think, can get up above this because he's a technical guy, but he's up above it in the sense that he's pursuing something like an accelerationist project, but his considers it and is involved in it so directly that he doesn't think about it as an acceleration. He doesn't care to theorize it as an acceleration project. He's living it. It's about motion. It's about whether Brock can learn new forms of motion, new ways of making machines creative, and new theorems in physics. And it's taken as straightforwardly rather than in something like the Peter Thiel way, where it's thought over as a theoria, or as in Wittgenstein's sense, as like model soldiers, which act as language, so that there's a model of things instead of the actual things, and then we can play with them and ask what the actual things are. There's not that in Musk. He's just involved on the battlefield, but in this case, the battlefield of techne. But then there's Bannon. Okay, then there's Bannon and Bannon. So in this sense, I could see Bannon is more of he is an ideologue. He has ideas. He's thinking about the right angle type of stuff. He's thinking about our involvement in foreign wars. He's thinking about issues of trade unions. He's thinking about financial issues. But this is I think this is the problem. Is Bannon is he needs to. Yeah, this MAGA movement would have to increase in. It needs a gain in insight relative. Why not present it as relative to the Pauline Christianity? That seems palatable to Magna, right? And it's also has the merit of being true. Pauline Christianity and Greek philosophy go together in a lot of ways. So that would be excellent. I guess that's my recommendation.